Thanks, everyone, for joining today's webinar on policies for ending pellet pollution, organized by FIDRA. I am Falco Martin, Program Officer on Marine Plastics from Fauna and Flora, an international wildlife conservation organization. And over the last years, I have been following different pellet policy developments, such as those of the International Maritime Organization, the European Union, and the United Nations Global Plastic Treaty. I will be chairing this webinar today, and I will provide an introductory presentation on the topic of plastic pellets. I'll just provide a brief overview of some of the policy developments that are ongoing, and I'll highlight what is needed to effectively prevent pellet pollution. So for your information, today's pellet webinar will be approximately 1 hour long, and we will have in total 4 brief presentations followed by a Q&A. I'll start with a few housekeeping rules to ensure the hour we have together runs smoothly. So first of all, can I please ask all speakers to keep their mics off during each other's presentation? I see that that's the case, so thanks everyone. And then just be aware that this webinar is being recorded, and it will be made available on the FIDRA's YouTube channel following the event. Please don't hesitate, all people in the webinar, to put questions in the chat while the presentation are going on, and we will come to the Q&A session. We will answer the question during the Q&A session at the end. Please also feel free to drop question while we are in the Q&A, and we will do our best with the speakers to address all the questions we have in the allocated time. So now what I will do is introduce today's speakers. So we've got an amazing panel with us, with experts from the Pew Charitable Trust, FIDRA, and the Environmental Investigation Agency, who will run us through our topic today. So together with myself, we've got 3 guests that will do presentation. First, Amy Youngman from the Environmental Investigation Agency. So Amy is a California-barred international environmental attorney based in the Netherlands who joined EIA as a legal and policy specialist. Amy has prior experience in other areas of international environmental policy, climate change litigation, and ocean conservation, but her current role focuses on the Global Plastic Treaty with complementary plastic policy work at the International Maritime Organization, the Basel Convention, and the EU. So today, Amy will be providing us with insights on the plastics treaty development ahead of the last round of negotiations that will be taking place in South Korea in approximately 2 weeks. Our speaker of the day will be Natasha Tulis, who leads Pew's effort to advance European Union legislation to curb microplastic pollution with Pew's Preventing Ocean Plastic Project. In her talk of the day, Natasha will dive in different ways to engage with policymakers at the national and international level. And finally, Heather McFarlane from FIDRA will be closing our presentation session. Heather has been working for science and environmental NGOs for over 15 years and now works at FIDRA, an environmental charity working with civil society, governments, and industry to deliver solutions to chemical and plastic pollution. In her presentation of the day, Heather will highlight how resources such as the Great Global Nurdle Hunt data can be used to engage with policymakers. Okay, well, now without waiting any further, I will kick us off with a presentation to introduce the topic. Just waiting for the slides to come up on the screen. Thanks a lot, Jamie. I think everyone should be able to see the slides. Yes, all is good. Thanks, Jamie. Okay, first slide, please. So my presentation, as I say, will be focusing on the on introduction and topics, so providing solutions to pellet pollution. So I will give a brief overview on the issue of pellet pollution, and we'll touch base on what needs to be done to effectively prevent this pervasive form of pollution. Next slide, please. For those of you who don't know what plastic pellets are, as you can see here on this image, they are very small, lentil-sized plastic items, and are the industrial feedstock used to produce almost all plastic products. So they are the third largest source of microplastic pollution globally, with over 445,000 tons leaking out of the global plastic supply chain every year. And pellet pollution is a global issue, as we see it happening nearly everywhere. And it's not simply caused by unintentional losses to the environment. It is actually a result of supply chain-wide systemic failures to implement loss prevention measures. And the negative side of pellet is that they have huge impact on biodiversity, but also they impact communities and economies around the world where we see pellet loss happening. Next slide, please. So the good news, at least, is that pellet pollution is entirely preventable. And today, that's what I will focus my presentation on, so showcasing how can we solve the pellet issue. So studies have shown that sound pellet loss prevention measures could reduce pellet loss by 95%. And this could be achieved through a series of complementary measures based on a true supply chain approach to bring about a systemic change in the way pellets are handled and transported on land and at sea. By a supply chain approach, we mean that every company, regarding of size or location, across the full plastic life cycle, so that produce, handle, transport, store, or process plastic pellets, has to implement and maintain effective loss prevention measures that meet verifiable mandatory minimum requirements based on international standardized measures for pellet handling, packaging, and transport. So it is crucial also that all companies that handle pellets are legally required to provide independent third-party verification that these pellet loss prevention measures are implemented, maintained, and monitored for effectiveness at every stage of the supply chain. Furthermore, to really effectively prevent pellet loss, there must be transparent reporting mechanisms for quantities of pellet produced, handled, imported, exported, and lost, alongside mechanism for accountability in the case of historic, future, and ongoing pellet loss. Finally, because of their characteristics, pellets are highly mobile and very difficult to clean up when they're in the environment. Thus, there is a need for standardized, ecologically sensitive protocols to clean up pellets at the source, so to limit further dispersion into the environment, and efforts to clean up existing sites of pellet pollution and accumulation must take into consideration the local environment and ecological sensitivities to avoid potential negative impact. So I've provided a condensed summary of like some of the measures that are needed so to really prevent further pellet losses. And this is something that must be incorporated and mandated from policies. Next slide, please. Now, touching on policies being developed so to prevent plastic pellet loss. So in recent years, and in a response to increased recognition of the impact that pellet pollution has on the environment, a number of regional and international regulators have begun to explore options for tackling pellet loss. As I mentioned, pellet pollution is a result of supply chain-wide systemic failure to implement loss prevention measures. Over the last decades, voluntary industry-led initiatives so to reduce pellet loss have shown to be insufficient and ineffective. And the only way so that pellet loss could be prevented is through the adoption of regulations, which contains the element highlighted in my previous slide. So the European Union started a policy process to tackle pellet loss. And a regulation proposal is currently being discussed in the different EU instances. And while the ambition and reach of the regulation is still to be confirmed, this really marks a major big step to tackle this pollution, as it could be the first regulation we see developed on the topic at the regional level. Similarly, and following multiple major maritime spill incidents and under the push of member state and the civil society wanting to see the shipping of pellet regulated, the International Maritime Organization, so the bodies that regulate maritime transport at the international level, started a process to reduce the environmental risk associated with the carriage of plastic pellet in package form by sea. It is really great to see momentum growing towards preventing pellet loss through regulation, as there is currently no global requirement to prevent pellet loss. The IMO and EU regulation developments if they succeed, can be complementary with other international policy developments, such as the development of the Global Plastic Treaty, which is currently undergoing and which so far mentions pellets in its negotiating text. The development of an effective and ambitious plastic treaty can complement these other pellet policy development and work as an overarching framework to ensure that there is a harmonized and global approach to pellet loss prevention by ensuring consistency, transparency, and best practices across all sites, modes of transportation, and countries party to the treaty. And while the treaty is still under development, it is really key that pellet pollution is addressed within it, as this could lead to really dedicated governance at the global level. Policymakers can have really an immediate positive impact by passing legislation that sets mandatory requirements for all pellet handlers across the supply chain, which really highlight as well the importance for us to provide decision makers with science-based evidence and tools to achieve these solutions that I've been describing. And this can ensure that all businesses that handles pellets across the whole supply chains are held accountable to the same level of performance, and that the solutions to the problem are applied in a holistic, coordinated, and complementary fashion across both land and sea. Next slide, please. This is my last slide, so I hope you found this introduction interesting. I will now hand over to my colleague, Amy from EIA, who will dive further in the ongoing plastic treaty negotiation with a specific focus on pellets. Amy, feel free to go ahead whenever you're ready.
Hi, everyone, and thank you to FIDRA for having me back. I always look forward to this pre-INC discussion. And thank you to Falco for getting us to a point of understanding on where we are with plastic pellets, what they are, and the existing governance on pellets that we continue to work on. So today I was asked to cover what to expect at INC 5 around pellets, and there's quite a bit of interim adjustments that have happened. And so I'm going to try to get through it in a short amount of time. And per usual, I have a text-heavy slide presentation, but again, this is not really to read, but more as a way to conceptualize where we are in the negotiations in relation to the text around plastic pellets. Next slide, please. So before the text, here are some scenes from the last INC in Ottawa. In the last 4 INCs, we have worked through many iterations of zero draft text, but not necessarily gotten to any point of negotiation, at least around the core measurements of the instrument, what the treaty will cover. And so rather, we have a complete compilation of views. After INC 4, all of these views were adequately reflected and streamlined within a 77-page compilation text, which has 3,770 sets of brackets. If you're unfamiliar with international law, bracketed text means that the text is unagreed upon and needs to still be negotiated. And once agreed upon, those brackets get deleted, which requires a lot of time and work. Next slide, please. So by way of example, this is what provision 8 on emissions and releases looks like in that compilation text. While some of the parts of this life cycle, like emissions and releases where pellets live, are relatively straightforward, we also have provisions that are very contested and still require a lot of negotiating and time, like production, problematic plastics, chemicals of concern to be banned or phased out, and finance. And we only have 7 days in Busan to complete this treaty. So we, along with many people, understood that 7 days is not enough time to go through the brackets and have agreed upon text at the end of Busan. Therefore, it started to become evident that if we're serious about finalizing the treaty this year with the implications of Tuesday's election results, it makes it even more important. We cannot use this compilation text as a basis for negotiations because it's simply too much work. Next slide, please. So pictured here, oh, sorry, next slide, Jamie. Thank you. Pictured here, you can see plastic pellets are mentioned a singular time in these 77 pages. And here's what the text on pellets currently looks like in this article in the compilation text. And not pictured are accompanying language on adopting guidelines in the future. But getting back to thinking about what we can do to give ourselves the best opportunity to get an agreement in Busan, we thought it was important to kind of triage the document. So evaluate what's required, most negotiating time, and then what are the bones of the treaty that are necessary to have now that will lay the requisite foundation to build out over time. And the chair agreed with this sentiment, and he took the intersessional period to meet with the head of delegations to discuss this. And over a month, he used those backdoor discussions to have 3 non-papers come out. And for timing, we'll just talk about the final version, non-paper 3, which is a 17-page proposed compromise treaty text that reflects input from prior discussions, and it aims to focus on essential areas of convergence and also those unresolved issues. So there's 3 articles that have no text associated because they need to be discussed further in Busan. And the aim is to reach the final consensus by the end of Busan's negotiations. Next slide, please. So here's what the chair's non-paper says on emissions and releases. Pellets are highlighted there. The idea is that we would use this non-paper as a basis for negotiations if member states agree. And here you can see that there would be an obligation for parties to take measures to manage, reduce, and where possible, eliminate releases of plastic pellets to those environments listed across the supply chain. And it's great to see that there is wide support by all regions to retain plastic pellets in the treaty. That being said, I'm a lawyer. So next slide, please. I, of course, have lots of textual recommendations to make this language stronger so that we're avoiding all releases to all environments across the life cycle of plastics, which then makes things like from the supply chain a bit redundant, and also pellets should be defined to include granules, flakes, and powders, not separated. So they should be relisted. That being said, this is a spirit of compromise, and I think that we need to be flexible. So we understand from Falco's presentations, we've learned from years of industry voluntary guidance, and we know as experts on pellets what is necessary to create that governance that does prevent spills and what practices are necessary to achieve zero loss. Next slide, please. So whether we use the non-paper or the compilation text on pellets, which I cut out some of the brackets here for room, but I think it's important that we lay the foundation to retain broad scope for all plastic pellets at this stage. We can agree at a later date what the definition and best practices and governance should be, but we should focus on seizing the opportunity to have it retained. And then to the extent possible, looking for more meaningful binding language to implement those best practices that Falco just discussed, noting that we definitely are seeing a lack of support for transparency, which is particularly important for pellets here and in the EU. And if you don't know how many pellets are being handled, nor have a standardized reporting obligation when accidents occur, nor have standardized reporting mechanism to look at it overall, holistically, then there's no meaningful evaluation of progress on whether or not these technologies and practices are actually effective. So I would like to see negotiators bring back mandatory reporting and transparency in the treaty, and that can be used as a foundation where we continue to build out over the next couple of years. So that's it for me from now on this. I know it's a lot of information in a short amount of time, but I'm happy to answer any questions on this. And thank you again for having me.
Thanks a lot for your presentation, Amy. So insightful. And yeah, looking forward to see how the discussion in Busan go. So our next speaker will be Natasha now. So Natasha, if you're ready, I will give you the floor now.
That's great, thanks. I'll just wait for the slides to appear. Yep, there we are. Well, thanks, Falco, for the introduction. Thank you, Phaedra, for organizing the webinar. It's great to be reunited with colleagues. We work on the same topics to be able to discuss how to fight against plastic pollution with a specific angle on the pellets. So I work in the Brussels office of the Pew Charitable Trust, and we focus our work on microplastic legislation. So we work both on EU proposal that Falco mentioned, but also on the UN plastic treaty negotiations. Next slide, please. So I'm supposed to talk about how to engage with policymakers, and that being both at national and the international level. So using the case study of the pellets, I wanted to share what we have been doing on this file. So how do we engage with the policymakers? So for the pellet regulation, there was an interesting momentum because we had, as Falco mentioned, a text being proposed at the regional level of the European Union, and while being at the same time also negotiated at the international level. So it's interesting to see how you can engage on those two different levels, but also not necessarily in the same way. So what's important when you talk about something that's technical and you need to be able to lay it in a more friendly way for policymakers is to try and find a hook to the storytelling of the issue and how you address it. Next slide, please. So what's important in the engagement is trying to find a way for policymakers to connect with the topic you're presenting. And I'm just going to share an example. So we organized a field trip on plastic pellet pollution. So this is in the context of the regional initiative of the European Commission. So what happened is that we invited policymakers working on the topic. So that could have been members of the European Parliament, representatives of governments, technical staff, of course, advisors and other colleagues working in other NGOs to come and witness the plastic pellet pollution in a site in Belgium. And we did that with the help of Surfrider Foundation. So it's always challenging for people to understand what we're talking about. So the idea there was to be able to provide them with a first-hand experience and basically having a connection with the topic. And what's interesting in this sort of engagement is that you can give them a more personal understanding of the issue. And for example, if we look on the next slide, it's really useful for policymakers to see for themselves how pellets can camouflage into the environment and how chronic this phenomenon can be. I know, Jamie, if you can just show the next slide after that. Yes, perfect. This is an example of one of the sites near production facilities. And when you arrive, at first, you don't really see what's underneath the grass. And it was interesting to see policymakers themselves looking at it and realizing that as soon as you try and dig a little bit more, you'll see pellets appearing. So this form of engagement is sometimes more useful than just having an argumentation or discussion behind the closed door of an office. And also the advantage of linking the EU regional proposal is that you can actually connect with a lot of other actors that know this pollution phenomenon into their own local context. So you can link people from France who's been having that, people from Spain, and then you link all of them, understanding that there's like a bigger policy issue at the global level, and then suddenly you start making sense, and you're able to also take a step back from the immediate regional approach and also showcase it at the global level. Next slide, please. So of course, something that you all know is that it's very difficult to find policymakers that have the time to go with you for a full afternoon to witness what pollution looks like. So it's also very important to be able to organize events where you can basically bring them this expertise, but right through their door. So those are examples of events that we organized, both for the EU legislation, but also at the INC. So on the top, you'll see what happened in Brussels. We organized an event inside the European Parliament to discuss about pellets, where we had invited local actors who had experienced firsthand the pollution because of an accident that happened off the coast of Spain, where pellets were released into the environment. And so we wanted to have this testimony brought up directly with the people who were supposed to act on this topic. We also have pictures of events we organized at the INC4 negotiation events. So we had the UNEP side event where we presented policy recommendation on how to address this. We also have, it's hard to see, but we organized a photographic exhibition, which was interesting because it was a way for policymakers to have a break from negotiations, meet one another in a more informal setting, have discussions. And also what you can't see very well, but there are little pins on the table, and I'll just show them here. So we made them before INC. So this is a small puffin, and it's a way of engaging also with policymakers because we use scientific facts explaining that puffins have been found with pellets into their stomach. Or we have one with, it's a turtle with a plastic bag, a sea turtle. And this kind of material is helpful because the show and tell also enables to make a better connection. And then I also always carry on me now this little jar of pellets. So those were some we found in Belgium. And it's also a good way of connecting with the people when you're actually talking about this issue. Next slide, please. So what we also do in engagement is to support the policymakers with background information. Usually there will be a strong need for technical information when you start working on a topic. It's quite technical. There are a lot of different contexts to take into account. And what the policymaker likes is when you are able to provide them with a very concise understanding of the topic. You also can adjust the message to the person you're talking to, so you can go into more technical details when you're having a discussion with the staff, who are extremely important actors in the engagement, but also being able to go up a little bit with the main message in like a few minutes when you're talking to a policymakers. Next slide, please, Jamie. So I've been working in Brussels for 10 years now, and before working also for an NGO, I used to work in EU institutions and in the European Parliament for a number of years. So I've had the opportunity to experience on both sides what it feels like to try and reach out to the decision makers, but also being on the receiving end and having a lot of stakeholders come to support you in your work. So if I had to conclude with a few recommendations on how to engage with them, I think it's important to really have a story to your advocacy. People usually, policymakers have a lot of meetings. Their agenda is always filled with meetings and intervention and speeches. And so you are also in a competition for attention and information. So it's always a good idea to make your story stand out and find connections with the person you're talking with, and use, as we were talking, just concrete examples so that they can remember it once the meeting is over. Provide adapted message is also very important. You need to understand who you're talking to. Are they familiar with the topic? Have they never heard what a plastic pellet is? Are they looking for technical and scientific information, or more understanding the global context? Then it's about becoming a trusted partner. It's not going to happen in a flash. You'll need several meetings to gain the trust of the policymakers. It's about also being seen in this policy ecosystem and environment, being able to see your commitment, providing them with the relevant information at the right timing. And this is just relationship building, and it takes time. And finally, an example of engagement is you need to understand how to collaborate with the other partners, the other NGOs who are working in the same fields. When you have little attention from a policymaker, it's also useful to use other NGOs' materials. So, for example, when we engage at the UN, we will basically be using the global hurdle hunt map and show, look, for example, in your country, this has been found by your citizens, and also they have developed a policy brief on that, and it makes sense for your national context. And by doing that, I think that you really maximize the impact that you're going to have in your engagement with policymakers. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you, and I stay available if you have any questions.
Thanks so much, Natasha. Really cool and insightful presentation. Love the puffin. Yeah, very nice as well. And I agree, the collaboration piece is very important. I just want to remind everyone in attendance that you can drop your question in the chat, and that we will come to them at the end of our presentation. So now I will hand over to Heather, who are going to be closing our presentation session. Heather, over to you.
Thank you. I'm hoping you can see my screen. Yeah, it's still there. So we've had some great introductions to both the topic and top tips of how to engage policy makers. And I just wanted to sort of summarize it into some of the resources that we've got available at FIDRA. And these are resources that have gone onto our information hub that come from many of the organisations that you've heard from today, but also from people that have been inputting into the Nurdle Hunt. So there's quite a few different areas that I'm going to go over, but if we're to think about policies to prevent pellet pollution, you can sort of think about that we need resources and information in at least these 4 different areas. So we need evidence of the problem. You also need evidence of the solution. You need some engagement with the policymaker, but also you need to be able to show that you've engaged with other stakeholders as well, and it's not just you as a lone voice saying that this is an issue. And you need those opportunities. And this year, as we've heard, there are lots of opportunities to engage with policymakers on this issue. So I'm going to talk you through some of those. But just as a reminder, FIDRA are the organisation that run the Great Nurdle Hunt, but we can't do it without the support of all of the organisations, all of the individuals that go out and look for nurdle pollution. And they don't just look for nurdle pollution, they also get involved in policy and advocacy work. They get involved in giving us testimonies that go into some of this. They submit pictures, they share their resources. So as I said, lots of the things on here aren't just from us here at FIDRA. So, oh, my slide is not moving. Oh, hello. So just as a recap, the different plastic pellet policy solutions, we think there needs to be legislation. We think there needs to be things going on at the International Maritime Organization, the supply chain standards and certification, as well as some of the big overall things like reducing plastic use and demand, increasing reuse, increasing safe recycling, but overall we need that production reduction, and as well as these pellet measures as well. So it's not saying that only one of these things can happen. We need all of these things to happen, and all of these things will require action at various different levels. So INC5 is the thing that's coming up immediately, but we've also got the EU pellet proposal going on. There's things happening at the IMO, and there might be things happening in your country to do with pellet pollution specifically as well. You know, we're aware of bills that have been advocated by senators in the US, for example. France has already got legislation. So no matter what sort of opportunities you might have or relationships you might have already, there's probably an opportunity for you to do something on pellets. So I think these are the different opportunities that we're aware of, but there might be more. But I think they all still follow this similar model of, you know, following those top tips that Natasha gave you, and hopefully using some of the resources that we're going to be presenting now. So in terms of evidence, the evidence of pollution, I think, is really powerfully comes across when you see these kind of visuals, and this is the map that's on our Nurdle Hunt website that lots and lots of people around the world have contributed to. And it really shows that pellet pollution is widespread, but it also shows that all these people care. We've had over 20,000 volunteers have gone out now since the Nurdle Hunt began. And those people are giving up their time and giving their energy to identifying this problem. So it shows both. It shows that there's a widespread global problem, and also that there's thousands of people that care about this issue. So we've been taking that evidence and turning it into reports. So this is the report from this year that really shows how widespread it is. And when we first started working on nurdle pollution, we started here in Scotland, where we're based, but it has grown globally as the project's grown, and pollution has been identified worldwide. But there is a concentration in Europe and North America, partly because that is where a lot of the plastics industry is. And I'll show you some evidence on that in a moment. So we've taken, as you see, we use lots of images. Again, these were submitted through the Nurdle Hunts, as well as the sort of stats and facts as well. So both of those are really, really important. And we try to make sure that we include a good spread of different images, but there are more available. In terms of solutions, we also need evidence that the solutions that we're advocating for, so, you know, Falca made the case very clearly that we need these legislated supply chain approach. And one of the sort of key pieces of evidence that you can reference for why we know this works was from a report that we commissioned from Eunomia, looking at the different options for reducing emissions. This was then built on by the EU, and that really has shown that this is again, it was a commissioned report by the EU to try and show what the different options are. And this is where that figure comes from, that 95% of pellet pollution is preventable. In terms of the IMO, Fauna and Flora commissioned some analysis, and that really shows that the International Maritime Organization, there are ways that we can prevent plastic pellets, and the legal options that are available and the different routes to getting to that at the International Maritime Organization. So it's not just us saying this has all been backed up. So if you ever need a reference, those are available. So when you've got that evidence, as we've seen, it's useful to have it firsthand. So this is that picture there is on a beach in Scotland where we took the Head of Marine Scotland, so our government agency, out to see the nurdle pollution firsthand. We've taken it to different COP26 when that was in Glasgow, and have been involved in some of the INC side events and side discussions as well. So these first-hand opportunities are really useful, and Natasha spoke about that really, really well. And I think the top tip from today is always have a little jar of nurdles, a secure jar of nurdles on you. So if you can't bring them to the nurdles, you can bring the nurdles to them. So the events, the nurdle hunts themselves can also be an opportunity to engage policymakers. So if you are organising a nurdle hunt, think about inviting the press. If the press are there, then you may well get a politician there as well. So you can invite people along, and that does sometimes happen, or you can do it more of a behind the scenes thing. It depends what makes sense in your area. But the nurdle hunts themselves are a great opportunity, as well as going to events where you know that policymakers are going to be there, which things like COP26 or whatever it might be, but that is relevant to you. So particularly when you're thinking about doing some of this work, if you're doing things on social media or you're creating reports, you're going to want some images. So we've put together an image library of all the images that have been shared with us over the years that you are allowed to use in your own advocacy. So please do download those, and we just ask that you reference them, you credit them as has been requested. We also have images like this infographic, got no text on it, so it should be able to work no matter what language you are working in, and you can add your own captions. So we've got infographics as well as images of nurdle pollution that you can use. Even more evidence. So as well as the evidence of nurdle pollution, say you'd gone and looked on the map and there wasn't any nurdle finds and there was no way that you could go out and do a nurdle hunt yourself, you may still be at risk of nurdle pollution. And this is one of the things that we've worked with Oracle Environmental experts on, publishing a report last year that really identified where are plastic pellets produced, where are they transported, where are they turned into products, where is the recycling taking place that might turn it back into flakes and powders. And you can see that by mapping this plastic supply chain, you can see that concentration, particularly in North America and Europe, of the plastics industry. We know that there's probably an underestimate in some areas. So there are some data gaps, but this is just showed that the lack of transparency in available data. But there is these concentration areas, and that, as you remember, closely maps onto where we find a lot of the nurdle pollution as well. So this really shows that even if you haven't got a nurdle pollution on your doorstep, you might still be at risk, either from the industry or from a shipping route. And this is what we've seen already. When you look at some of the major shipping routes that go from the Gulf states over to China, we've seen maritime spills along that route. So even those countries that aren't either the main producer or the main user are at risk of these pellet spills. And particularly if you're a country that has a high percentage of tourism for your GDP, like we've highlighted here in pink, then you are going to be particularly vulnerable to a marine spill for your national economy. So, you may find that impacts protected areas. We've seen that before, or it may impact tourist beaches, and it can have these knock-on impacts on fisheries as well. So between this evidence of the nurdle pollution that's already there, the industry that's there, and the shipping routes that could be a risk either now or in the future, you really get the picture that this is a global issue. So one of the things you can do with some of the data that's in this report is really drill down. So you can download all the nurdle hunt data. We also have as much of the point data. We've got listed all the sources in this report so that you can go back and find those sources yourself and map them. And we've put together in the report a couple of case studies, but you can do your own. So this is a case study in the UK that shows sort of in detail where the plastics industry is, where the plastic pellets have been found, and the different protected areas. And this is the type of thing that can sometimes help bring these issues to life. We've also been turning some of these things into resources specifically for INC5, the plastics treaty negotiations. So we have developed a bit of an overview of what the issue is on one side, and then drilled down using those maps, using that data that we've got, and some of the image we've got from spills. We've got a little testimonial in there, a little quote in there as well, to try and get over to the people, the delegates that are going to be at these negotiations, what the issue is and what they can do about it. So these resources are also editable. So if you don't like this and you think that's not going to work for me and the negotiator that I want to talk to, you can change it. It's just a starting point, and we are going to probably keep tweaking it right up until we're handing it over to someone, because we've just had the non-paper come out, we've just had different things happening. So this is a starting point and it gives you an idea. But please feel free to create your own, or if you think actually I need something zoomed in just on my area, there are ways to do that. And you're thinking, okay, great, but how do I use this NRDL data? We have a webinar for you that tells you how you can download the data and different ways that you can map it. So if you have a look at that link there, that'll talk you through some of this. We also have more information on these solutions, including all the resources for INC5 that we're going to try and compile together over the next few weeks, again, are available on our hub. So please do have a look at those, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what you come up with. And if there's anything that you produce that you think actually this is something that I think would be useful to others as well, we would really love to be able to share it. As I said, this hub has been created by everybody in this network. So if there's anything that you think would be useful, please do share it with others, even if it's just for inspiration. It might be very specific to you, but sometimes just seeing that perfect infographic that is just what you need can be really, really useful. So thank you for sharing everything with us, and for sharing your data, for sharing your insights, and for sharing your resources. Please keep doing it, and we'll keep sharing it as well. And I'm really looking forward to seeing what advocacy happens in the next few weeks and months and beyond, because the Plastics Treaty is only one aspect of this. As soon as that is concluded, in whichever way, it will still come down to national implementation. So either way, we're going to have to get back to our own countries and make sure that they deliver for plastic pellet pollution as well. So I'm really looking forward to seeing everything you come up with in the next few weeks and months and beyond, and good luck, everyone.
Thanks so much, Heather. We're now getting to the end of our presentations. As Heather said, data is key, and sharing all this information together is really what allows us to inform properly the different policy development that are ongoing. I want to thank our speakers today for these very insightful presentation. I think we've all learned a lot and are really looking forward to hear what's going on in the next coming months with the development of the different policies. It has been a pleasure for me to chair this webinar, and thanks again, FIDRA, for this wonderful opportunity. Thanks again, everyone. I want to just wish a lovely day, morning, afternoon, night, wherever you're following us from. And if you have any further question, please feel free to reach out to us via email.